Welcome to The Debate. Today, we are looking at the year 1984.
Right. A really fascinating year.
Imagine being 18 years old, married in secret just to escape the suffocating grip of your family while simultaneously being marketed to the world as a naive, sheltered, innocent child.
Yeah, it's wild because if you're listening to this and you only know the artist we're discussing from her later, Rhythm Nation era, you are probably picturing a fierce, militaristic, hyper-independent global icon.
Exactly. But in 1984, the reality was the exact opposite. Today, we are examining the foundation of one of the most monumental careers in modern pop history, Janet Jackson's 1984 sophomore album, Dream Street.
The era right before the independence.
Precisely. And we are looking at a very specific, fiercely debated question regarding this era. Was this period a calculated, star-studded pop laboratory that brilliantly laid the groundwork for her future success? Or was it a dark period of coercive family control and stolen childhood that she had to actively rebel against in order to survive?
It's a huge contrast.
Right. So as the industrial optimist today, my position is that this album was a high-level pop crucible and a bold industrial experiment featuring heavyweight collaborations.
And I come at it from a completely different way. As the psychological realist, I argue that the project was a traumatic exercise in family exploitation that forced a necessary radical rebellion.
Let me establish the framework of my position first, because I think Dream Street is incredibly misunderstood.
I'm listening.
Historically, it is routinely dismissed as disposable, awkward teen pop. But when you actually look at the mechanical architecture of this record, it was a massively ambitious, glossy production.
Sure, the production values are high.
Right, but you don't just accidentally assemble this caliber of talent in a room. You have Giorgio Moroder, the undisputed king of disco, the man behind Donna Summer, producing 5 tracks. You have her brother Marlon Jackson bringing genuine electro-funk credibility. And most importantly, you have cutting-edge, aggressive experiments with the Minneapolis Sound. I see this era as a highly sophisticated, necessary boot camp that proves she could handle complex, edgy music.
Well, I understand why that lineup looks impressive on a spec sheet, but we have to start with the fundamental truth of 1984, and that is the stolen childhood thesis.
Go on.
Janet Jackson, in her early teens, did not even want to be a singer. We're talking about a girl who desperately wanted to go to college. She wanted to study business or animal science at Pepperdine University, and just live a quiet life working with her horses.
So you're saying she was a reluctant participant?
Reluctant is an understatement. I mean, Dream Street is essentially an unaccredited Jacksons Project.
Okay, that's a bit harsh.
But it's true. Her father, Joe Jackson, and her brothers simply used her name and her youth to sustain the family brand's profit potential. Remember, this is post-Thriller. The Jackson family is an absolute corporate monolith at this moment.
They certainly were.
And Janet was afforded absolutely zero creative input. She was a vehicle, not an architect. She was placed in front of a microphone and told what to sing, when to smile, and how to pose. The glory of this production is entirely a facade.
Look, I see why the narrative of coercion is powerful, especially given what we now know about the extreme, often brutal dynamic of the Jackson family machine. But let's look at the actual musical strategy in the studio.
I wouldn't call it strategy.
Well, you call it an unaccredited Jacksons Project, but the heavyweights they brought in show a clear, brilliant design to transition her from bubblegum soul into a global pop commodity. Let's talk about Giorgio Moroder.
Right, the disco pioneer.
Exactly. For those who might not know, Eurodisco isn't just standard dance music. It relies on these driving, sequence synthesizers, incredibly precise 4/4 beats, and a very sleek, almost anxious, futuristic atmosphere.
It is very distinct, yeah.
So bringing in the architect of Eurodisco to produce tracks like Communication and the title track Dream Street was a deliberate, expensive move to give an 18-year-old Janet a sophisticated international sound.
I hear you on the sound, but...
And look at the duet with British legend Cliff Richard, Two to the Power of Love. That wasn't a random pairing. That was a highly calculated maneuver designed specifically to conquer the UK and international adult contemporary markets.
Oh, come on. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that was brilliant strategy. Let me tell you why.
You don't think Moroder and Cliff Richard were strategic?
Wait, I'm trying to wrap my head around your defense of this. Why on earth would her label pair an 18-year-old American girl with a middle-aged British pop knight who was in his 40s? Was there actual artistic logic there, or were they just throwing darts at a board?
It's demographic targeting. You pair the rising American teen with the established UK adult contemporary star to bridge the Atlantic. I mean, it's classic cross-promotion.
From an artistic standpoint, it's completely absurd. It exposes exactly how profoundly out of touch her handlers were. They were throwing things at the wall, trying to see what demographic they could monetize next. It wasn't strategy, it was ventriloquism.
Ventriloquism is a strong word to use for A&R development.
But it's mechanically accurate. Look at the lead R&B single, Don't Stand Another Chance. It's produced by her brother Marlon, right?
Yes, Marlon produced it.
And who is on backing vocals? Michael, Tito, and Jackie. The Jackson machine literally surrounded her voice with their own. Think of it like a legacy corporate franchise where Janet was treated as a middle manager rather than a CEO.
I mean, it was a family business.
Right. The heavy staccato electro-funk was great, yes, but she was functionally acting as the frontman for her brothers. She was executing their vision, singing their ad-libs, and maintaining their relevance in the urban R&B market while Michael was off dominating the globe. Where is Janet's agency in that?
I will concede that the family loomed large over that specific track. But let me give you a different perspective on where her agency was actually brewing. It wasn't in the family tracks, it was in the experimental tracks.
Okay, where?
If you want to see her identity forming, look at the introduction of the Minneapolis Sound on this record.
Ah, the Jesse Johnson productions.
Exactly. Jesse Johnson, the guitarist from the time, was brought in to produce 2 tracks, Pretty Boy and Fast Girls. For context, the Minneapolis Sound essentially takes the aggressive driving bass lines of funk and marries them to the cold synthetic keyboards of new wave.
It creates a very harsh metallic sound.
Right, this almost industrial landscape. And these tracks are brilliant, sexually charged, aggressive synth-funk experiments. Pretty Boy is nearly 7 minutes of screaming synthesizers and gritty grooves.
They are definitely a departure.
This is where she definitively drops the safe bubblegum soul image. She is singing about physical attraction, she's experimenting with female empowerment, telling the world she can be sweet but also own her desires without being slut-shamed.
Yeah, the attitude is definitely there.
That music is her coming of age. It proved to everyone, including the label, that she could write a harsh, edgy beat.
Well, that's a compelling argument about the sonic landscape. Jesse Johnson's tracks absolutely slap. I won't deny that. But have you considered how utterly disconnected that gritty music was from the reality of her daily life?
What do you mean?
You argue her true identity was being discovered through the music. But I argue her identity was being forged in direct, hidden opposition to it.
How so? Because the music she is recording with Jesse Johnson is incredibly assertive?
The music was assertive, yeah. But the visual and personal reality she was forced into by her father and the label was suffocating. Let's look at the dissonance. While she's in the booth singing Fast Girls, what is the label doing with her image?
They were keeping her pretty conservative.
Extremely conservative. They have celebrity photographer Harry Langdon shooting her in these soft, pastel, completely infantilizing setups. Sweaters, soft lighting, innocent smiles. They are aggressively marketing her as the safe, sheltered teen.
True, the marketing didn't match the Minneapolis Sound.
And worse, Joe Jackson forces her to take a role on the television series Fame, playing a character named Cleo Hewitt.
Right, just so they could cross-promote.
Exactly. It was a synergistic marketing tool. They wanted to use the television broadcast to air her music videos to a captive audience. It's documented that she hated being on that show. So where is her real identity?
You don't think it was in the studio?
No, it wasn't in the studio with Jesse Johnson playing a funk character. It was in her hidden rebellion.
Ah, you're referring to James DeBarge.
Right. In September 1984, right as this album is dropping and her family is distracted by their massive victory tour, an 18-year-old Janet secretly elopes with 21-year-old R&B singer James DeBarge. in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Which was a massive scandal.
We have to understand the context here. The DeBarge family was essentially Motown's answer to the Jacksons. They were another massive, complicated R&B dynasty. This wasn't just a teenage romance.
No, it was a collision of empires.
Exactly. It was a collision of two industry empires, and it was a radical, desperate act of defiance. It was her singular way to scream to her father, to the label, to the world, I am in control of my own life.
It was an incredibly chaotic period, certainly. The marriage was annulled by 1985, and it's well documented that James DeBarge was battling severe substance abuse issues at the time. It was a tragic situation.
It was tragic, but look at the industry's reaction to the marriage. A&M Records executive John McClain went into absolute panic mode. Why? Because a married, independent woman destroyed the lucrative, innocent child star illusion they were selling.
They definitely wanted to protect the asset.
The panic over her marriage perfectly highlights the industry's desire to keep her infantilized. Her rebellion wasn't on the vinyl, it was in her actual life.
Okay, that is a fascinating psychological reading of her actions off camera. And it's true, the panic from the executives over her marriage didn't just stay in the boardroom, it completely bled into how the public received the album.
The promotion was a total mess.
The promotion was a mess, the imagery didn't match the sound, and that leads us directly to the chart performance. But I would frame the result differently when we look at the ultimate utility of this era.
Wait, you're going to defend the commercial performance?
No, I will concede the numbers. Commercially, it was a profound disappointment. The album peaked at a dismal number 147 on the Billboard 200.
Yeah, it tanked.
Not a single track cracked the Billboard Hot 100. By the metrics of the 1980s pop machine, it was a total failure. But in the grand architecture of her career, this failure was actually a massively successful period of R&D, research and development.
Calling a number 147 chart peak successful R&D is quite a spin, I have to say.
Hear me out, because this is about the mechanics of sound. Think about the physical nature of Janet's voice. Janet does not have the gospel-belting, roof-raising power of a Whitney Houston or an Aretha Franklin.
No, she doesn't.
Her voice is breathy, rhythmic, almost whispery. Now, historically, if you put a soft, whispery voice over a dense, traditional R&B track, the voice gets buried. It disappears.
True, it gets totally lost in the mix.
But the Jesse Johnson tracks on Dream Street, despite their commercial failure, served as the ultimate proof of concept. When John McClain, who was a brilliant A&R visionary, listened to those tracks, he didn't just hear a flop, he heard the future.
Okay, I see where you're going.
He realized that the way to utilize her specific vocal tone was to place it over aggressive, loud, staccato funk. The heavy drum machines leave rhythmic pockets of empty space, and that is where her whisper fits. Think of it like putting velvet over sandpaper.
Oh, velvet over sandpaper. That's a great way to put it.
Right? The friction between her soft, intimate voice and a harsh, metallic beat was the magic formula. It is a direct, linear cause and effect that the R&D of Dream Street led McClain to pair her with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, the absolute masters of the Minneapolis Sound, for her next album.
Which changed everything.
Exactly. Without the musical experiments of 1984, that connection is never made. The sonic template wasn't a mistake, it just needed refinement.
Look, I agree that the connection to the Minneapolis Sound is vital, and the velvet over sandpaper mechanic is exactly what made her a superstar later. But I'm going to elevate the commercial failure of Dream Street to something far more profound than just R&D.
What could be more profound than finding her signature sound?
I call it failure as a catalyst. Let's play out the alternate history for a second. What happens if Dream Street is a massive multi-platinum success? What happens if the Cliff Richard duet actually conquers the charts and the Marlon Jackson tracks win Grammys?
Well, she becomes a superstar 2 years earlier.
No, she becomes trapped. Think about the power dynamics. If that album hits number 1, Joe Jackson's absolute control over her life and career is vindicated. The label's strategy of infantilizing her in pastel sweaters is validated.
Oh, I see.
She would have been locked into the role of a lucrative, voiceless puppet for the rest of her career, endlessly churning out whatever her brothers and father told her to sing. She would have never had the leverage to say no. The fact that the album completely bombed was her absolute salvation.
That is a striking way to look at it. You're saying the failure gave her the ammunition she needed.
Exactly. You cannot fire a manager who is bringing in millions of dollars. The machine protects its earners. But when the album stalls at number 147 and the label is deeply disappointed and her personal life is in shambles from the annulled marriage, that is the exact leverage an angry 19-year-old Janet needed.
The perfect storm.
It was this specific commercial disaster that empowered her to walk into an office in late 1985, fire Joe Jackson, and sever business ties with her family entirely. The failure didn't just point to a new sound, it literally broke the chains of her confinement.
I won't deny that the psychological breaking point was essential for her emancipation. Firing Joe Jackson was the most important decision of her life. But you can't have the breakthrough without the blueprint.
Fair enough.
McLean still needed to know what to do with her once she was free. If we look at both of our positions, my focus on the industrial sonic experiments that figured out how to record her voice, and your focus on the psychological pressures and the necessity of commercial failure, we actually converge on a single, unbreakable thesis.
The laboratory of failure.
Precisely. Dream Street is the essential laboratory of failure that birthed the legend. The glossy, high-pressure industrial pop expectations, combined with the incredibly dark, suffocating familial control, created the perfect volatile conditions.
You need the intense pressure of the music industry machine, but you also need the explosive emotional release to actually break the mold.
Right.
And we hear that explosive release explicitly in the very next thing she does. When you listen to the opening seconds of her 1986 masterpiece, Control, what is the very first thing you hear?
The manifesto.
Exactly. It's a spoken word manifesto. She steps up to the microphone over a harsh Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis beat and says, "When I was 17, I did what people told me, did what my father said. I let my mother mold me, but that was long ago."
It still gives you chills when you understand the historical context of what she was escaping.
It really does, because she is directly, explicitly indicting the Dream Street era. She is talking about the Harry Langdon photo shoots, the Forrest Fame appearances, the studio sessions where she was a middle manager told exactly how to sing and where to stand.
Yep.
The pain and the molding of 1984 provided the raw emotional fuel for the greatest declaration of independence in pop music history.
It really is a testament to how monumental artistic independence is often born from the deepest creative confinement. To fully appreciate the journey she took, you have to look at where she ended up once she finally took the reins of her own life.
We've talked so much about the struggle today.
Right. We spent this entire time talking about the scared 18-year-old girl in 1984, manipulated by executives, trying to find her voice over synthetic beats, desperate just to go to college and be left alone.
The girl who couldn't even get a single track on the Billboard Hot 100.
Exactly. Now fast forward 11 years to 1995. Picture the scene. Janet Jackson arrives at the airport in Bangkok, Thailand. She steps off the plane and she is instantly swarmed by 6,000 screaming fans.
Wow.
They are chanting her name. She is on a massive, record-breaking global tour. She is calling the shots, writing her own material, producing her own tracks, and dictating her own image to the entire world.
It's a staggering contrast. From a claustrophobic family compound where her brothers sing her backing vocals to standing on the other side of the planet as a completely autonomous global icon.
That image in Bangkok proves that the sheltered, manipulated girl from the Dream Street era had finally, definitively found her own way home.
It really does.
The laboratory of 1984 was brutal, it was restrictive, it was confusing, and it was a commercial disaster. But the friction it generated was strong enough to spark an empire.
Absolutely.
It leaves you wondering how many other artists are currently trapped in their own laboratories of failure, just waiting for the right moment to seize control.